Hello over there. Hello everyone. Luciano Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Sunday. We're starting a little bit late. I apologize. Now it's 3:38 Rio de Janeiro time. I see we have some of our friends here already. And let's get started. Let me check if we have any questions or points of interest from you guys so far. All right, chat window is empty. All right, so I just said it was empty. Gary showing up. Welcome, Gary. Gary says, boa tarde, Dr. Oliveira. How long after permanent residency grant, family visa, before shipment, duty exempt, family residency granted only after 2 years, when permanent family visa granted. All right, Gary. So in terms of the shipment duty exempt, this is a common question we have here at the firm, and naturally, right, when people move to Brazil, they wanna have the opportunity of shipping a container with like their goods and belongings to Brazil. And Brazil historically has a really high import tax. Usually, when you try to bring stuff from abroad, you may pay up to 100% tax on that. And that's very interesting to discuss because nowadays there is a lot going on in the United States in terms of tariffs and so on. So traditionally, at least, from the Brazilian perspective, yes, Brazil has been using tariffs and import tax as a trade tool, and with huge taxes, even when you are importing goods to Brazil. Like when you buy stuff from Amazon or if you buy from Temu, one of those new e-commerce websites, Brazil is going to traditionally charge really high taxes or tariffs, if you will, on whatever you bring into Brazil. So, with that context said, people want to bring their stuff without paying those, really high tariffs and taxes. And there is discretion in terms of the Brazilian revenue system, more specific, the federal police, who's going to be enforcing such taxation. And the idea here is that if you are a resident from abroad, and if you are moving to Brazil, yes, you should have this opportunity of bringing personal belongings, of course, without such crazy taxes, right? And then I'm gonna tell you, like the most common situation in which the Brazilian federal police is gonna be assessing that you're living abroad, and that goes for actually Brazilians and not foreign citizens like we Brazilians when we live abroad for just a year, right? So let's say if I move to New York and then I stay in New York for like 13 months, after 13 months I can go to the Brazilian consulate and ask for a letter stating that I spent a year abroad, and then the consulate is going to ask for evidence such as like utility bills. If I had like a rental, so I'm probably gonna present like a lease, and through all those documents, I'm gonna be making a case that yes, I was a resident abroad for over a year, and the Brazilian consulate is gonna give me this letter. So after I get this letter, or it could be even in the meantime, I'm gonna negotiate with a shipment company for them to bring a container from the United States to Brazil. Okay, and the idea here again is that you're going to be bringing personal belongings. So you're not going to be bringing, like 5 computers or, I don't know, 10 large LCD screens. You're going to be bringing stuff that would naturally be presented in a household, right? So It could be like a fridge, it could be like a fancy fridge, a double door, fridge from LG. I don't know, 2 or 3 large TV sets. You could be bringing a washer, a dryer, a dishwasher. So this container would very clearly convey that you are bringing your personal stuff, like with clothes, maybe collectibles, like a couch, like a bedroom set, and so on. And this is going to be something, again, that the Brazilian Federal Police is going to assess on the spot, meaning that, they're going to look at the description for the container belongings, and it is going to say, personal, assets or personal goods or household goods being brought from abroad by a prior resident abroad, right? And again, for Brazilians, a document that's going to support this concept of living abroad is going to be this letter from the consulate. Now, on the foreign citizen side, usually the document that is going to be clearly explaining the situation is going to be your RNM. Right? The RNM is the card that you're going to be getting after you become a resident, right? So, in theory, you could be residing in Brazil, in different ways. You don't need to be like a permanent resident exactly to be a resident of Brazil, naturally. So, let me share with you the resident card. I'm not sure if you are in that stage already, but this is the card. This is the card you're going to eventually receive as a resident, okay? And this card, in our understanding, it's going to be something that's going to clearly convey to the Brazilian Federal Police that you are a legal resident in Brazil, more specifically, a legal foreign resident in Brazil, right? So that's the kind of roadmap. And naturally, the shipping company is going to be in a better position to assist you through this journey. And a couple of things we always mention to our clients is that first thing, nothing is guaranteed in either immigration and customs. So, like you do that on your own in terms of, understanding that there may be a different interpretation by the customs. They could, apply a tax on your stuff, and then of course you're going to need to chase a review of the taxation being imposed on your assets, either through like the shipping company, or you're going to need to retain specialized legal help to dispute the taxation. But that's always a risk, right? Like some people, they hire our services for either a visa or a residency, and they kind of feel like, all right, I have guaranteed this benefit. And naturally, again, in immigration or taxation, nothing is really guaranteed, right? It's more like a dynamic that's going to occur as you go. So this is our first heads up. The second heads up is that, usually to bring a container to Brazil is very costly, most of the time, and more costly than a foreign citizen would expect. In addition to the costs of the shipment itself, you also needed to pay a specialized brokerage service to assist you with the release of the container at the port. And very often in Brazil, just maybe, unfortunately, just like everything else, there is an excessive level of bureaucracy and red tape. And I brought a container, right? Like I once lived, the example was given, sharing, it was real, more than a decade ago, right? Like I spent like some time in New York. I brought a container from, it was actually in Florida, right? Like I was in New York, then I went to Florida, and then I brought a container from Florida, and there was an excessive timeline for the container at the port, and I had to pay, like they call it the demurrage. They pay, I don't know, like uh, excessive rental fees for the container. So at the end of the day, I was happy because I brought stuff that was important to me personally, but cost-wise, it didn't look it didn't look like a good deal at all, right? So that's the second heads up. I think people assuming, all right, I'm gonna have a really great break by bringing stuff without paying port fees to Brazil. But once you take into consideration everything that you are spending on bringing this container, it doesn't look like such a great deal anymore. All right, Gary. So yes, that's it on the import front. If you wanna expand a little bit more on your question about the 2 years permanent visa, family residency, I can address that as well. All right. I have a Renata Escarano. Welcome, Renata. Good to see you over here. Let's see. Renata is sharing as a Brazilian with dual citizenship living in the U.S. What are the requirements for opening and maintaining a bank account and an investment account in Brazil? Tax reporting, etc. Yeah, that's a good question, Renata. And I'm glad you asking this question because there are so many Brazilians out there who don't ask the question and just do things as they go. And not surprisingly, a number of Brazilians end up in trouble because they never file, for instance, for the tax exit, right? So I'm not going to give you a direct advice, Renata, on your taxes. Just because it wouldn't be a good idea, right? To be dealing with such an important topic like in a live stream. But I can share with you a few principles addressing or a few principles impacting Brazilians. Either a Brazilian without a U.S. nationality in the U.S. or dual nationals, right? It doesn't change as long as you have a Brazilian citizenship. You are under certain obligations, right? So one of the obligations, like if you are not born in the U.S., like if you are born in the U.S., naturally you're not gonna file most of the time the so-called tax exit or declaração de saída definitiva do país. But if you are a Brazilian living in Brazil and eventually moving to the U.S., the first thing to be done is like to file for the tax exit. There are a couple of steps to be completed to effect the tax exit, but you are basically informing the Brazilian revenue system that you are leaving the country. You're kind of saying, listen, I'm going to be living abroad and I want you to leave me alone from a tax perspective, right? And Brazil, traditionally, or let's say up to now at least, has been accepting of this reality, right? Like the Brazilian revenue system says, all right, so if you're going to be, working elsewhere for whatever money you're making elsewhere, you're going to be paying taxes over there and not over here, because it doesn't make much sense for me to be, charging you taxes on money that you're making elsewhere and while you're living elsewhere as well, right? So that's kind of the concept. You file the tax exit and you kind of, turn off the tax liability in Brazil. Okay, again, from a very high level perspective, and by all means, don't believe that what I'm saying is enough for you. It's just more like very general ideas about the impacts of taxation on Brazilians living abroad, right? So first one we said is going to be the tax exit filing or declaração de saída definitiva, all right? And then despite letting the government know that you are living abroad or not, you also need to follow certain guidelines to avoid the tax liability in the country, okay? So again, despite filing or not filing the tax exit, you also should avoid certain things, such as having a regular bank account in Brazil. Okay, so a regular bank account is going to be that bank account that you go to Bradesco or Itaú or Banco do Brasil, and you just say, I want to have a checking account. They're going to open a checking account for you on the spot. And this regular traditional checking account, it is available only to tax residents, right? But the bank has no obligation to explain those things to you. So if you just show up and you ask for a bank account, guess what? You're going to have a bank account that a non-tax resident should not have. So super common, right? Like people are living in the US, they're saying, well, I'm paying taxes over here, I'm not paying in Brazil, and it's just like a mix-up. But, like if you're diligent with your taxes, the correct type of checking account for you to have is the so-called non-resident checking account. All right. So this checking account is specific for non-residents, and they are gonna even report to the Brazilian Revenue Service that you are a non-resident, right? And that's gonna be the same thing for everything else that you do. So if you're gonna have, for instance, investments in the country, you must have a non-resident, investment, non-resident investment account. Okay. Another example, another distinction: if you have a property in Brazil, extremely common, right? Like a Brazilian is in the U.S., making money in U.S. dollars. Very easy to buy property in Brazil. So the Brazilian goes there, buy the property, starts to renting the property, and he rents as he was like a resident, and that's not how you should do it. As a non-resident, the tenant should be, actually paying your taxes on a monthly basis. And of course, you're going to need to retain the services of an accountant to prepare a payment coupon for the tenant to be paying that tax directly to the Brazilian Revenue Service. And then the tenant can pay, of course, the balance, right? Meaning the rental less the tax, the withhold tax is going to pay the balance to you in your non-resident bank account. Okay, Renata? So that's more like, again, just to show a little bit of the dynamic in Brazil that should be carefully followed by Brazilians when they, intend to be a non-tax resident, right? Now, for many people, but it's still more like an exception. If I would guess, I would say probably 30% of Brazilians living abroad, like in the United States or Europe, they still want to be treated as a tax resident in Brazil because they are going to be running a company, because they want to have a freedom to invest in whatever they want. Okay, and in this case, the consequence is that they are going to be paying taxes in the United States, they are going to be paying taxes in Brazil as well, and not necessarily in double, because both Brazil and the United States, in theory, they would allow you to compensate what you're paying in taxes in one country as a credit potentially in the other country. All right, so I hope this introduction was helpful, Renata. And Yokora, good to see you, Yokora. Yokora says, Bom domingo, Luciano, watching from San Antonio, Texas. So glad to see you over here, Yokora. You are very welcome here in our channel. We have a Christina Lembo. Christina says, question about digital nomad visa application in Brazil, Migrante Web, if the application is completed before my tourist visa expires. Am I in good standing? How long does it usually take to hear back? Christina, usually not a good idea for people to self-apply. Migrante Web is not a platform for end users. It's more like for immigration professionals. Now, answering your question about filing your application before your tourist visa expires, right? In theory, if you have like a good application in the works with the Brazilian immigration, this should do what we kind of explain as, stopping the clock. So whenever you have a valid application with the Brazilian immigration system, the understanding is that you're stopping the clock, meaning that you are no longer incurring in additional days being counted against your quota, right? So if you have 90 days and you are 60 days in and you file an application, then in theory, this should stop the clock. Now, what we see going on is that people, like they're just doing experiments with Migrante Web, and sometimes they have a filing that was done like in an incorrect way, and this thing gets in a kind of limbo, and sometimes they do have trouble, even though they filed something, but it was something that was not filed incorrectly, and that could mean that even though they did file something, they are still incurring in days against their quota, right? But let's assume if you do everything correctly by filing an application for either digital nomad or, like retirement. And another nuance, Christina, whenever you file in Brazil, technically, we don't call it visa, it's like a residency. I'm just saying that because if you look for visas, you're not going to find a visa in Imigrante Web. You're going to find the residency, autorização de residência, right? So that's another distinction. But yes, if you file something correctly with the Imigrante Web or other immigration systems, in theory, you should stop the clock and not incur in fines for staying beyond your limit of time given when you enter Brazil. Faz, all right, Faz, how you doing? Faz is saying, Olá, should I be in Brazil to get my temporary permanent residency permit? Can I apply process being outside of Brazil? I am applying for Brazilian citizenship using my Portuguese nationality. Right. Okay. So that's probably your end goal, right, Faz? Like first, because first you get the permanent residency, and only after you've been living as a permanent resident in Brazil for a few years, you're gonna be able to apply for the Brazilian citizenship, right? I know that Portugal, for instance, Portugal is gonna allow under certain situations for a person to apply straight away for the Brazilian citizenship, and that's not common in the Brazilian framework. But permanent residency, you gotta apply while you're in Brazil, okay? It cannot be processed outside because since it's like a permanent residency, it doesn't make sense for you to be applying abroad, at least from the Brazilian immigration perspective, right? So some of the components are gonna be, for you to show your passport and paperwork supporting that you are physically in Brazil and not elsewhere. Okay, Faz, I hope that helps. Sex Dragon, hey Dragon, good to see you over here. I think I heard you say once that after you obtained the digital nomad residency, CPF and R&M, your firm would help with finding housing if needed. Did I hear that correctly? A separate fee? Dragon, yes. I mean, we're not gonna be, we usually do the search, like finding housing, but that's for property acquisition. Okay, our service wouldn't be ideal, for you to find housing, because just like as you may imagine, like you're gonna be paying, lawyers to find housing, right? I mean, it doesn't sound like a good type of investment. I would rather use realtors, right? Like realtors, many realtors, they don't even charge you. They are gonna charge you sometimes just like a month worth of rental, right? And they're not gonna charge you until you actually secure the rental, right? In our case, we do provide services when you're buying a property. When you're gonna buy a property, for instance, for the sake of permanent residency, within the scope of our services, we do find a property for you to buy. But I think it does make sense because at that point in time, you are spending a lot of money. And from that perspective, our legal fees are going to be more compatible with the whole approach. But if you're just like, searching for rentals, then we're not the right match, Dragon. I think you would be better off, by hiring realtors, if that makes sense. Yokora, is it accurate to say that in Brazil, digital nomad will not count towards citizenship? However, Portugal, a digital nomad visa will count towards citizenship. Absolutely, Yokora. That's a pretty good point, right? So, Brazil and Portugal, they have, some similar routes for immigration, such as the digital nomad, right, in both countries. Brazil has the retirement route. Portugal has something similar, but not exactly the same, which is going to be the D7, the passive income visa. So they call it passive income because they don't care if you are retired or not, which makes 100% sense to me. They shouldn't worry if you're retired. They should worry if you have the income. So Portugal does pretty well on that front. Brazil is going to want some type of more, like retirement related income. But going back to the digital nomad, yes, in Brazil, you can stay. Right now, there is an ongoing discussion if you can renew the digital nomad route in Brazil indefinitely. But let's assume if you could, in theory, you could stay in Brazil as a digital nomad for 10 years, for 20 years, and never get to the point in which you're going to secure either the permanent residency or the citizenship, right? Brazil doesn't give you much value for the digital nomad track from that perspective. Portugal, on the other hand, is so interesting. Like in Portugal, if you stay for any legal reason, right, or for 95% of the available immigration tracks, as long as you stay legally in Portugal for 5 years, you can have access to the permanent residency or even, in certain cases, the Portuguese citizenship. So very different, outcome. Very interesting comparison, Yokora. Yui, nice to see you over here, Yui. What are the proofs required for civil union and how much time does it take in 2025 to get the citizenship in terms of being eligible and then processing time to getting the passport? Right, so civil union in Brazil, there are two different approaches, two main different approaches. One approach is like for just people, to be together, and you could be sharing bills, you could be renting a house with both names on the lease document and so on, right? So this would be more like on the, like fact-based civil union, which, by the way, in Brazil we call união estável or stable union, right? But the concept is kind of similar. And the second type is the type that you just go to a registry and you tell the registry, listen, we are in a civil union. The registry says, well, if you are in a civil union, who am I to say that you're not? And they're just going to draft the papers basically, for you guys to, yes, confirm that you are in a civil union, right? And before anyone comes up with the idea, well, that sounds like a great idea, to secure residency in Brazil, permanent residency, and even citizenship. Remember that with the civil union in Brazil, it comes a lot of obligations. Civil union in Brazil nowadays is exactly the same thing as a marriage, right? Like, I mean, there was a whole, a discussion about constitutional rights, and Brazil does have this trend of innovating in family law. I don't know. It is something that I'm not really, very happy about it because most often, like, the Brazilian court system, particularly the Supreme Court, they are going to cross boundaries and they are going to, arrive at decisions that are just weird, in my opinion. And one of them is to say that a civil union is exactly the same thing as a marriage, right? So That's going to be for your obligations as a spouse. That's going to be for inheritance rights. That's going to be for pretty much everything. So once you get into a civil union in Brazil, this is going to come with all the strings you can possibly imagine. And in Brazil, the strings are not few. And therefore, I'm just highlighting, right? Like if this thing sounds too good to be true, it is probably because it is not, right? Like, I mean, it does come with some serious downsides from the obligation perspective. And I'm just highlighting so you can think twice before jumping into a civil union. All right. Now, this said, you get into a civil union either by, fact-based, providing proofs, or by, going to the registry and, accepting or recognizing that you are in a civil union. The idea here is that you have the same thing as a marriage, and you can go and apply for the permanent residency. And after you get to the permanent residency, after 1 year of permanent residency, you could even apply for the Brazilian citizenship. All right, so it's a pretty interesting route as long as you factor in and understand, like the risks of getting into a civil union. Mary Lou Henry, hello, happy Sunday. Happy Sunday, Mary Lou. Mary Lou is asking, can we open a bank account with a retirement visa? Yes, Mary Lou, you can certainly open a bank account. Usually the route, right, just to explain, because if I just say that, like, you get the retirement visa, you show up in Brazil and you ask for a bank account, the bank is going to say no. So, just to be more specific, it works a little bit more like this. Like, if you're getting a visa abroad, let's say through a Brazilian consulate in the United States, once you enter Brazil, you're still gonna need it to secure the residency, right? The visas in general, they are just to enter the country. They are not for you to stay in the country from a Brazilian immigration perspective, right? Like other countries are different, but Brazil understands, listen, a visa is just to enter the country. So once you enter Brazil with a retirement visa, you're gonna need to apply for the so-called residency. And so your Brazil retirement visa is going to give you access to the retirement residency. And only after you go through the steps necessary to obtain this card you see on the screen, is that when most banks are going to be happy to open a bank account for you, right? If you are in São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, I don't know, Salvador, Fortaleza, like in major cities, you get the card, it's going to be very easy for you to open a bank account. For some of our clients who are more in the countryside, like in a tiny city, even with the card, it may be difficult for you to open a bank account. But if you are in this tiny city, very often you just need to go to a bigger city close by to be able to open the bank account. All right, Mary Lou, I hope that was helpful. Yui, how long is one allowed to be outside of the country for the 1 year residency after stable union requirement? We tell our clients to not, stay anytime outside of the country. There is an understanding that if you stay for up to 3 months outside of the country within the 1 year, you're still qualified to apply for the citizenship, but we do not recommend because the immigration, again, nothing of those things are rights per se, right? That's very important. People sometimes, and it's just natural, right? Like people are not attorneys, so they just assume, all right, if I can't stay 3 months out of the country, I'm going to stay the 3 months out of the country, and they will have to give me the citizenship. And naturally, it's never like this. There is always an immigration, right? Like someone who's going to be reviewing your application, and the better your application looks, the higher the chances of securing the thing that you are asking for without headaches, right? So even though in theory, like from the regulation perspective, you could stay for up to 3 months abroad, we strongly recommend against it, right? Like if you're going to be securing citizenship, be nice, be respectful to the country, and try not to stay longer than a couple of weeks. That's our recommendation. But again, if you just go by the regulation, in theory, up to 3 months out of the country would not be a bar. But again, immigration officer is going to be reviewing all the requirements, and they are going to be trying to assess if you really deserve the Brazilian citizenship at the time of application, Yuri. Bill, so good to see you over here, Bill. Bill says, Olá, Luciano, my friend. There is a YouTuber that I think you might be able to do a podcast with. His channel is The Nordic Investor. He dabbles in real estate in Brazil. He's Swedish. All right, I'm going to take note. Let me take a note over here. All right, The Nordic. All right, Nordic Investor. All right, that was good sharing, Bill. All right, Nordic Investor. Note taking. Thank you, Bill, for your participation, and always good to see you over here. Dragon, good to see you. You too. I've hit the thumbs up like. Hello from Italy. Okay, I heard you correctly, but the context was wrong about the housing. Yeah, realtor definitely sounds a lot better. Yes, Dragon. Thank you for asking anyhow, and thank you for the thumbs up like. Yes, if all of you, if you could do us a favor and like our live stream, and I see the number of likes is increasing as we speak, that is appreciated. That helps with our business, and it also helps with other people just like you to find the content that we are producing right now. It looks like we have, at this point, 16 viewers and only 7 likes. So, yes, if you could go ahead and like our live stream, this is going to be appreciated. Thank you for the heads up, Dragon. Tyson Bedingfield. If we enter Brazil with the intent of applying for the digital nomad, if they check luggage at the airport, could they deny entry if they see documents for the visa? Due to the purpose of visiting. Tyson, never saw that happening, all right? Like extremely remote chance of that happening. Tyson, Brazil is completely different from the United States. Yes, I mean, I could see that happening. Like if you're going to the United States, saying that you're going to visit Disney World, and then all of a sudden you have, bags showing that you are basically just moving to the U.S. I can see that happening. Not in Brazil, right? Now, again, if you bring in 10, like bags, yes, you could have an issue by bringing 10 bags, to Brazil. But if you're just bringing something reasonable, like a couple of bags, even if you have a lot of clothes, like in theory, that could still be for a 90-day trip. I never saw anything like that happening, Tyson. I wouldn't be concerned. But again, try to avoid something that's going to draw too much attention, okay? Such as, like excessive luggage, because then again, it just triggers additional attention. And, in theory, by the way, like before, it sounds like I'm advising you to do something wrong, which is not the case. Let me tell you, it is okay for you to come to Brazil and apply for the digital nomad, okay? So it's not illegal. If it was, first thing, if it was illegal, the Brazilian immigration would not give you the digital nomad visa in the first place, right? Because again, making a comparison to the United States, when you arrive in the United States and you file for something within the first 3 months, there is customarily this idea that, you intended to enter the country to defraud the immigration system. So that's exactly the case in the United States. If you apply shortly after entering the country, guess what? There is a kind of, standard presumption that you came, with a different intent, from tourism. We don't have this framework in Brazil, okay? And I discuss about this topic with people from the Brazilian immigration, with people from, the Brazilian Federal Police, and they simply, don't have this framework in their heads. They say, listen, Brazil is not the U.S. In Brazil, people are welcome to come. They have the visitor visa, or they are entitled to enter the country under a waiver. you are welcome to do so. And if you want to stay longer, just apply for, like the digital nomad, and you're going to be welcome to stay longer. All right. So, very interesting question, because it helped me compare to the United States and make this point, hopefully, more clear to you guys, Tyson. Ronnie Dio, so good to see you, Ronnie. Do people from countries that were part of the Portuguese colonies have an option for permanent residency or citizenship in Brazil? For example, Angola. Ronnie, that's a good question. I know, we have many clients from Portugal, and Portugal does have this route. I would assume, and then I'm just like, I don't know as a fact, so I'm just going to be sharing what it could be the case. There is a chance other Portuguese-speaking countries have some kind of advantage, to enter Brazil, and we don't know because we don't work with this public, right? We work mostly with clients from the United States. We have our structures, our offices, our presence in the United States. All of that is gonna, create a type of service that's not suitable for, countries from Africa, for instance, right? So we don't have clients from those countries, and I am unfortunately unable to confirm. But I would assume, I know that there is some type of, it's not like a fully fledged pact or like treaty, but traditionally Brazil is going to give some advantages to Portuguese-speaking countries. So maybe, just maybe, there could be some advantages to other Portuguese-speaking countries. But I can tell you that yes, there is a very clear route for Portuguese people from Portugal enter and remain in Brazil. Okay, this one is traditional, and this one I can talk it about because we have a bunch of Portuguese clients. All right, Ronnie. Gary, for immigrant and returning citizen, duty waiver on single shipment only after 12 months out of Brazil, with less than 45 days in Brazil during that period. True, Gary, I'm so sorry. I cannot answer this question. It goes beyond my knowledge, right? There are companies specializing in shipping and customs, and they are better positioned to answer that question. Okay, Gary, I'm gonna need to skip on that one. But again, if you hire like a customs broker, or a customs broker in Brazil would be the ideal party to advise you on that. This said, like when you use our service for any of the immigration routes, what we do, share referrals for those custom brokers who usually are going to advise you free of charge, hoping to get your business. Okay, so if you happen to use our services, we would have some referrals for you on that front. All right, Yokota, great. Thank you for the clarification and for answering the other question I was going to ask about the D7 passive income visa in Portugal versus retirement visa in Brazil. Yes, it's so interesting. I like the Portugal D7 better because, again, it doesn't, keep this nonsense of expecting someone to be retired. Nowadays, and by the way, even like under the retirement track in Brazil, most of our clients, they are never really retired, right? Because nowadays, people in their 60s, even in their 70s, they still have so much to live. It makes zero sense to expect these people to be just idle, doing nothing, right? That's not the purpose. So we are very blessed to have many clients from the U.S. military. And we have, many clients coming from, with veteran benefits, sometimes with, disability, type of retirement income. And, of course, there is always the downside. Sometimes they have suffered, permanent disabilities because of war. But it's also interesting because many of them, they are going to come and enter Brazil under the retirement route in their 30s or their 40s, right? So a really interesting route. So even Brazil, Brazil says, listen, as long as you have a traditional retirement income, right, which is not the case for Portugal. Portugal is more flexible. In Brazil, if you have traditional retirement income, you can come to Brazil under the retirement route at any age at all. Okay, so there is that, Yokota. And if you have any other questions, let us know. I mean, very interesting to compare Brazil and Portugal, two countries for which, and by the way, we have a bunch of these seven passive income visas being processed for U.S. clients, right? So U.S. clients, they love both Brazil and Portugal for different reasons, right? Like, I mean, Brazil, continental dimensions, Portugal, one of the safest countries in the world, right? So different reasons for pursuing those two countries. Mary Lou, thank you. Thank you, Mary Lou. I hope you show up again. All right. Yui has another question. Are prenups allowed in civil unions, like some kind of contract? Because I already lost a lot during my first marriage in a Western country. Do not want to go through that again, even with my stable union. Yui, my recommendation for you, if you're coming from this experience, is that don't do it, okay? Don't do it, because prenups exist in Brazil, and particularly because nowadays civil unions are being just like a marriage. So in theory, you could have something like a prenuptial done in a registry in Brazil. Unfortunately, they don't hold much water, all right? Like, I mean, Brazilian courts, again, they're very activist. Like, I mean, they don't follow much boundaries, right? Particularly nowadays, our Supreme Court, but, just like the judiciary in general. So even when you have like an ironclad prenuptial, chances are you could have, you could have obligations such as like, spousal support for a certain amount of time. You're gonna need to share whatever assets you are acquiring during the course of the relationship. So, like if you're coming from such a situation, I would probably recommend you to do not follow the route, because you're probably just gonna be, incurring into the same situation again. Very honest feedback with you, Yui. Okay. All right, Yuri Travis. Hola, I am in Rio right now. Congrats, Yuri. That's so good to be in Rio. I love it. Thinking of marrying a Brazilian, is there any other way to get a family-related visa without getting married here? Maybe living together. Yuri, that's exactly the questions that Yui is being asking, like from the beginning of this section. There is the so-called stable union, right? Stable union. In the United States, some states, they're going to mention like civil union or civil partnership. In California and Texas, it's very common for people to call it like common law marriage, meaning it's not a real marriage, but because you're behaving like you are in a marriage, you are in a marriage, okay? And that's super common in Brazil nowadays. But you're just, like emphasizing the same thing I just told Yui. Like if you do like a civil union or a stable union, as we would say in Portuguese, that's the very same thing as a marriage, right? So you may just marry, all right, because the obligations are going to be there, the risks, right, of a post marriage, obligations such as spousal support, sharing everything you're being, acquiring, and plus they are going to be there anyhow. All right, Yuri. So yes, there are, there is the stable union / civil union, whatever you want to call it, but it's pretty much just like marrying, okay? So not sure if the concern is to not marry, but there is no work around the obligations are arising from a marriage in Brazil, Yuri. Yui, like it and subscribe. You could have like it done. I really appreciate it, guys, so much. I appreciate so much the support. We are arriving At the end of our live stream, I'm probably gonna get an additional question. But let me tell you, we're gonna be here together again. We're gonna be here together again next Wednesday. Remember that on Wednesdays we meet up at 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time, so it's a little bit earlier in the day. And I know it's not ideal for everyone. So, in addition to Wednesday, guess what? We also gonna be meeting next Sunday. So we're talking about February the 16th, and that's 3:30 Rio de Janeiro time. All right. Don't forget, you can come to our channel. You click on notify me, and then whenever the live stream is starting, you're gonna receive a notice. This way, you can come back and have topics of your interest discussed live. Tyson, thanks for the response, Mr. Oliveira. I like the video, greatly appreciated. I appreciate your presence, Tyson. Make sure to show up again. Ronnie, thanks. I am in the West, but was asking for a friend in Angola. All right, Ronnie. Ronnie, you are just like some of our other supporters, right? Just like Bill. Let's do like this, because you are referring this out. We could potentially get your friend in Angola like a 15-minute call just to see if we can help him or not. All right, without a cost. Just tell him to mention that he was sent by you, Ronnie. All right, that's the deal. Gary, we plan on using your firm. Can we send our paperwork in advance of our coming to Brazil, or do we need to be there to begin the processing? Good question, Gary. And we usually recommend that our clients start the process before coming to Brazil, because some of the documents may be easier to obtain when you are in your country of origin, right? Like, so it also depends on the type of route that you're picking. So for the digital nomad, we usually recommend you to start your journey a month before your entry date in Brazil. And for the retirement route, we recommended 2 months, because the retirement route in Brazil, in my opinion, nowadays is the more complex one, even more complex than the marriage-based permanent residency. And therefore, 2 months of time ahead of your trip to Brazil is recommended. But yes, like whenever you hire our services, we're gonna assist you with the document gathering, which I think it is as important as the application itself, right? Like some people, they say, well, can I have a list? Let me work on the documents first, and then I'm going to hire. I say, no, that's the opposite. You should hire us first, because then you're not going to be on your own chasing documents that you don't understand. You're going to have someone, right, like, fully available to advise you on how to best get those documents. And as you get those documents, they are being reviewed on the fly in order to shorten the timeline once you enter in Brazil to receive the so-called resident card. That's the card that we've been talking about. Very important. Some people, they say, well, like, I want to take advantage of my whole 90 days in Brazil, and then I'm going to, get the card. And I say, no, like, you don't understand. Without this card, you're going to be limiting your experience in Brazil extremely, because you cannot have a bank account. You cannot have like a regular cell phone account. Okay, you cannot have a bunch of things that are very important for you to have a fully fledged experience as a resident in Brazil. So therefore, very good point. Yes, you should start way up front of your trip to Brazil in terms of working on the documents, gathering the documents, having the documents reviewed, and so on. So I want to thank you, all of you, for participating in today's live stream. Very interesting questions and participations as usual. And don't forget to come back on Wednesday for one more live session. And I hope you guys have a blessed rest of your Sunday.